Did you just find a new job and the new job is using Prisma? You heard about it because you are in the TypeScript world, but you've never gotten around to use it yourself. If this is you and you want to get up to speed on Prisma, and just so you know enough that you can work with it and then you don't have to be embarrassed in front of your colleagues, then this is the right place for you. I'm gonna cover everything that you need about Prisma, from the schemas to the migrations and to what it generally is. And I'm gonna try to keep it as minimal as possible. And if you want to know more about Prisma after this, then feel free to go to the Prisma website. I'm on it right now, and find the official documentation, which I presume will be kept up to date for the entirety of the project's life cycle. So first of all, what is Prisma? The Prisma is actually two things. So I think most of you know it as the ORM, but there's also a schema migration tool built in. And so if you don't know what an ORM is, basically an ORM, a tool that helps you write database queries without having to write it in the language of the database. So most of you know SQL. So there are many different types of flavors for SQL, and an ORM makes it so that you don't have to know SQL at all. You can just use the language that you already are familiar with. And with Prisma, in this case, it's TypeScript. And there are different reasons to use an ORM, and mainly is the reason of speed. You get a lot of nice quality of life features by using an ORM. So you get usually usually you would get code completions, so you can just tap away. It'll give you type safety, so you'll also get to know about what the return, like what your data fetching returns. And also you could argue it makes the code a bit easier to read. And in my opinion, SQL is not the most easily readable language. The order of text is, in my opinion, really weird. I mean, first you select your fields, then you select your table, and then you do filtering and stuff. I don't know. I think SQL is a mess. So yeah, another reason not to use SQL and just use an ORM instead. A schema migration tool, what is that? So I think it's best explained if you think about your database as evolving. And I'm not talking about the number of rows that increases. I'm more talking about the columns, that the columns itself change. So you can add or remove columns, but you can also change the type of a column. For example, make it a string instead of an integer. And we can think of this as states. So in this example here, we have 3 different states on this table called node. And if you see the evolution of a node, it starts out just having an ID and content. Then we add the title to this node. So we essentially change the state. The schema migration tool in Prisma helps you forget about all of the migration scripts down below here. So going from one state to another, you would have to write the code that ensures that you can go from one state to another. And Prisma just handles this for you. It creates these migration scripts automatically, and you just have to define the states above here. So you just define declaratively that, hey, I want this node to have these columns, and maybe I want to change the column of one of them. So Prisma, you figure out how to do that. And that's schema migration tool. And that is super helpful because these migration scripts, it's can be really hard to write, because if you make an error, it's really easy to make an error writing these migration scripts. And if you make an error, it's also really hard to undo your mistakes. And Prisma kind of helps trying to alleviate some of that, those errors. So just to summarize, we use Prisma ORM if we prefer to have code auto-completions for our database queries, which we don't have if we just use SQL. We use Prisma if we don't want to write our own migration scripts. And then finally, so I guess one of the serious drawbacks about using an ORM like Prisma is that you don't get all of the database features available to you. So only the features that the maintainers of the ORM have supported you can do. So in the example of Prisma, well, Prisma is really great at CRUD operations. So if you just want to create, read, update, delete, easy. Also, Prisma doesn't really support special columns. So if you have a vector column, if you're creating an AI app, that's not gonna be supported. So you have to write your own SQL for that. So, but if your use case is simple CRUD and you are not using any advanced data types, then Prisma is a really good tool. Great. So let's jump into the installation. Okay, so I prepared this demo. I'm going to use Next.js for our full stack application. I'm going to use Postgres for a database of choice. And to spin up this Postgres, I'm going to use Docker. So if you're not familiar with any of these technologies, that's fine. I'm just going to totally glance over it. But if you want to know more, then let me know and I'll create a video of that, if that's what you want. Cool. Let's start out by initializing our Next.js app. And when that's done, let's install Prisma. And so Prisma is installed, and now we're gonna initialize the Prisma files and folders that it needs. Great, and then I'm gonna run my Docker container with Postgres. Perfect. So open up the folders that we just created in the file editor of your choice. I'm gonna use Cursor. But you can use VS Code if you want. If you're using VS Code, you can write in your terminal code dot. It will open up VS Code in this file that you're in the directory. It will open up VS Code in the directory that you're currently in. But I'm just going to use Cursor and dot. Perfect. Here it is. Great, and we need to change our environment variable such that it points to the Docker Postgres that we just spun up. And you do that by navigating into the .env file and just replace everything with this string here. Great. So let's talk a little bit about how Prisma works. In Prisma, if you've done everything correctly, you would have a folder called Prisma, and inside of that you would have a file called schema.prisma. The schema.prisma file is where you define your data model. So it's where you find all your relations with the different tables, your your primary keys and all of your attributes related to that table or tables that you have. And if you remember, it's actually what constitutes of the states. So at any given point, the Prisma, the schema file here would be always up to date, or it will always be the thing that defines your state of your database. So let's copy and paste in this file that I've prepared. All right, and so what we can see here is that we have two different tables. We have a table called node, and we have a table called category. The node has a primary key called ID. It has a title, which is a string. It has content with this, which is a string. And then in this example, it also has a category attached to it. So imagine that you can tag your nodes. In this example, you can only have one tag. But this is how we define foreign relationships in Prisma. So this has a foreign key called category ID, and the next line tells us, or tells Prisma, what it relates to. In this example, it relates to category ID. This field here references the ID of the category table. Prisma also gives us some really nice helpers. For example, it lets us define the default values of certain columns. And there's also this helper function called updated at. So whenever we update node, it will also update the updated at timestamp, so we don't have to do that ourselves. Really, really handy. Yes. And then if you want to define custom indexes, you can also do that. In this example, updated at, which is the when it was updated, we put an index on that so that we can filter or order by it later on in our application if we want to, and it will speed up the operation because it will then use the index. All right. Now that we generated our schema.prisma, we have a data model that we can use. Prisma will generate this client for us whenever we tell it to. And there is this command called npx prisma generate that will do that for us. So if we open up the terminal again and then run this command, now it generated the Prisma client. And so I'm just going to copy this code here. And I'm going to put it into source, call it db.typescript. And we actually don't need this or this logging. And so now we are generating our database client, and db is the variable name that we call our client, and this is the thing that this is essentially the ORM that we will be using. And so this is essentially what Prisma does best, which is CRUD, and I've just prepared a few examples of how this is done. So you call in whatever you named your client. In this example, we call it db. db dot whatever entity that you're referring to. In this example, node. If we had another table called users, well, we would then call dot users here, or user. And then find many if we want to have multiple results. Find unique if we only want to have a unique one. Find first, it will take the first match of all the matches that it finds. Again, for create, for insert operations, it looks like that, and update and upsert also looks like that. So it's pretty simple. I don't think I want to go into depth about how these works. I think you should look up into the documentation for how any of these works, but it's super simple. I'll give you a few examples, but I will not be the documentation. Okay, great. So let's dive into it. So I am just gonna copy in a few files that I have prepared, and let's talk about it. That, paste that in, and then global CSS, delete it. Cool. All right, let's talk about what I just did here. So in Next.js, you define your routes using the file structure. So in this example, we will have a home page that has these elements in it. We are going to have a form where we can input the title and the content, and when we create submit, it's gonna run this this function called create node. This is a server function, so it will run on our server. But whenever we create the node, we will call the ORM with db.node.create, and what you have here is you have you specify the data, and what you have here is you specify the data, you tell the title and content from our form data, and then that will create the form, and that will create the node in the in our database backend. We have a component, a sorting component. Basically what it does is that it changes the order by the order of our nodes, either to have the created at ascending or descending. Maybe we should do updated at instead. So whenever it's updated, either it will be like the oldest or the newest. And that's essentially what this sorting component does. It just changes the search parameter. And then finally, we'll display the nodes. And so we'll fetch all of the nodes using, again, the ORM. And with a find many, and then again, ordering it by ascending or descending. And let's take a look at the actions here. So I just talked about the create node. If you want to update using the ORM, you call db node update. You tell it which one to update or which ones to update. In this example, we just want to update where ID is the same as this ID that we're getting. And then the data, we want to tell it to update title or content. And actually I can do an update. So update will just by default only update one, and if you do update many, it will allow for you to update multiple. Cool. Then you can see we have a delete function up here. So it will delete the records, the node records where it matches this ID. And again, I think there is also a delete many if you are interested in deleting multiple nodes at one. And the delete and the update will be implemented as two different buttons. The delete button will be red and the update button will be blue. I think I'm just gonna run the program and then we can see how it looks like at least. So we actually do need to push our schema to the database, and the way you do that is writing npx prisma db push, meaning that you take whatever we have here in the schema and then you push it into the database so that the state of the database matches the state of our Prisma schema, like so. And now that we have done that, we should be able to run it now. And let's see. We should do a npm dev, npm run dev. It's still loading. Cool. So this is what we have. We don't have, and let's create a few nodes. So this is my node A with content A. Let's create it. And node B, content B. Great. And let me just refresh, and then you can see we have two different nodes here. And now we can change the order. And you can see here it updates the search parameters. Great. And we can even update the title. So node a new title and content a new content. Update, refresh. Here it is. Ascending. Cool. All right. And we should also be able to delete. So when I click delete here, it deletes the node. So that's how you use the Prisma ORM. You need to understand with the migration workflow in Prisma, which is super important. I think this is like by far also the hardest part about Prisma. So I'll talk a bit about how they expect you to work with it, and which commands that you need to do. So the key feature of Prisma is to manage the state of your database. You declare it in the schema.prisma file that we went over before. And so whenever you make a new feature, you might want to add a table or change something. And so you edit your schema file, and then you update the database with npx prisma db push. And I showed you exactly how you do that. Now, so you can iterate back and forth with the database, adding or removing tables and stuff like that, until you're satisfied with your feature, and maybe you want to share it with the other ones in your team, with your colleagues. So you want to push it into version control. And the way you do that is you generate a new history file. It's going to create the if I scroll up again to this, it's going to create the migration script in SQL for you to see and verify that, okay, it does what you want it to. And then you can check that into version control. And that's the way you do it. So if I'm just gonna copy this in here, I'm gonna paste the command, and let's call this add node. Yep. Great. So it just generated our migration script, and you can see what it created by looking at this SQL file. You can see that it created the node table, it created the category table, and then it created a few indexes for us, and also created the foreign keys that combines or that connects the node and the category table. were happy with my changes here and I want to push that to our repository, I could just now add it and then commit it and then push it. And now everyone in the team will be able to see, okay, that I created this SQL file. And it will run all of the SQL files. So if you have multiple migrations, it will run them in sequential order. So start from the top and then run it all the way down. And usually that is fine. But sometimes there might be errors, or there might be some reason for why we don't want it to just generate a table for us. And we might want to write our own SQL to handle our special case. So a special case could be to change an existing feature that makes it so that we have to change our model. So it could be that we change the data type from a string to an integer, so we have to write our own parsing logic in the database. It could also be that we want to add a special database feature that the Prisma ORM does not know how to handle. An example of this is vector embeddings or geolocation. It's not something that Prisma knows how to add, so you have to do that yourself. Or if there's a bad migration, and a bad migration can occur if the order of your migrations mess up. So for example, if you accidentally change a table, you try to change a table that doesn't exist, it could be because of version control in Git messes the order up or something like that. And you might need to revert a migration or just fix it such that such that the final state is what you want. And this is when you write your own migration scripts. And I'm going to show you, this is the workflow for doing that. You edit your schema to reflect the happy state of what you want. Then you generate a new SQL file, but you don't apply it to the database. And you do it using this command here. Okay, so we just created an empty migration and we haven't yet applied it, but let's see. We want to change all of the nodes. The title of the nodes, we want to change that to uppercase. So that could be a business reason for why we want to do this. Could be that we just want all of the casing to be consistent, and we've written some server code that now inserts new titles to be uppercased, but we also have to change all of the current existing nodes to reflect this business logic. And so we created this migration file that if you run the script, it's going to change it to the uppercase. And so now that we created it, let's see what we have. So we have a title called test. So we have one node with the title test, and it's not fully uppercased. But when we run this migration using this command here, it should be turned into uppercase. Right? It just ran and ran it successfully. So let's see, let's refresh. There you go. Now the title is fully uppercased. And so you can imagine you can write all kinds of SQL here, and then you can trigger it manually by applying it, and that makes it so that you can fix whenever state whenever a state becomes something that you don't want. Okay, cool. Finally, if you're working in a team, you don't want to be pushing to production manually. You want to have it as part of your CI process. And so I just prepared this small YAML file that you can use. Essentially what it does, it runs this deploy command in whatever CI environment that you have. And this command here, it doesn't really just runs and applies the migrations, so these SQL scripts. So it checks for what you have already run in the production database that you have, and if there are some of these migrations that it hasn't run yet, it will run them. So it will not check if the migration will succeed or not. It will just run it, and it will fail if it fails. Typically what you would want to do is you probably want to have like a staging table that you can test out your migrations on before you run it on your production, because if you run it on your production, well, then you're changing the state of your production database, and it's gonna be a pain in the ass for you if you have to revert those changes. But I'm just gonna show you where you would usually find these this YAML file here. So say that you guys are running this GitHub actions, and that usually you would create a new folder .github and then workflows, and then let's call it this name here, and then you would have this content here. So essentially what this YAML file does is that it installs our dependencies, and then it runs the migrate deploy on this production database URL that you have specified in the repository secrets. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. And if you have something else that I need to cover, then please let me know in the comments below. I'll see you next time.